10 minutes after 8 o'clock, welcome back. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is News and Views right here on Salam Media. And our first interview of the morning is not a good news interview. It has to do with our farmlands. It has to do with high rainfall, which has a very, very negative impact on maize crops. Now, last week, if you remember, we spoke about the locust plague in Northern Cape, Eastern Cape, and the Free State. And on top of that, we are now dealing with the situation of the very, very heavy rainfalls, which have created a lot of havoc as far as maize crops are concerned. And I have no doubt in my mind that the heavy rainfalls are also possibly responsible for the lotus plague that was experienced last week. I don't know if it is still ongoing, but that was a very, very worrying situation. On air right now, we're speaking with Chairperson Francois Strydom. He is from Agbiz and he's here to explain to us what exactly is the situation with the very heavy rainfalls in South Africa. How has it impacted on maize crops and possibly other crops as well? And what is the answer? Is there a remote chance that we could survive this? And how do farmers that have been devastated by this move forward? Francois Strydom, good morning. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Julie. Good morning to you and to all your listeners.
Thank you for your time. And undoubtedly, this is a very, very worrying situation. I understand that the damage caused by excessive rain in virtually every part of the summer grain production area, and especially in the Western Free State and Northwest, has destroyed vast tracts of grain fields. And obviously, this means that some form of urgent action needs to be taken, possibly calling on government to declare a state of disaster.
Yeah, Julie, let me just put it in perspective. I think let's start with the winter crops. There's two crop seasons. One is the winter rainfall area, and that is that harvest was gathered in August, September, October of last year. And that was a good harvest. A little bit of quality problems, but from a volume point of view, a good harvest. Then the wheat in the summer rainfall area is gathered in late October, November, and December. And of course, that is exposed to the summer rainfall, and that was severely impacted on two instances. And as you said, more so in the western part of our country than in the eastern part. And shortly, I will give you some factual statistics about the rainfall.
Mm-hmm.
But so the gathering of the wheat crop in the summer rainfall area was severely impacted, both volume, but also and more so on grading. And because of the big differential between different grades in the wheat grading system, the loss that farmers suffered are substantial, 1,500 to 2,000 rand per ton loss if your wheat is downgraded.
Sure.
I think that's the first issue. Remember that we are a net importer of wheat. We usually import wheat. So that would be our sort of fallback position, both on quantity and quality. We could import from especially the Eastern European countries. So although that is a direct loss to farmers from a country point of view, we would be able to handle that situation. So the more worrying part is your opening sentences on the maize, the soya, and the sunflower crop, planted, of course, in August, September, October, November, and December. Usually we start planting in the east in the Mpumalanga area in October, and then the planting date goes up to, let's call it the middle of December, very early of Jan in the western parts. And that was really the problem. Let me just really give you some facts.
Mm-hmm.
We have 116 years of data. Now let me start in the eastern part of the country. And if I talk about the eastern part, it's parts of the Free State and parts of Mpumalanga, Frankfurt, Rijks, Bethlehem, Delmas, Ermelo, Onderfontein, Middelburg, Bethel, that area. 116 years statistics for the 1st of July to the 31st of December. That average is 328 millimeters for eastern localities that I've given you. What they have received this year is 440. So, in other words, 134% of their long-term average.
Sure.
Just in December, those eastern localities, the long-term average is 110 millimeters. They've received 198 millimeters. In other words, 180%. So you can see, even in the eastern part, December was the real problem where excessive rain has fallen. If I just give you the same statistics on the western part of the country, and then I talk about areas like Viljoenskroon, Boeraville, Bultfontein, Wesselsbron, Swaziland, Kadelareyville, Wolmaranstad, Lichtenburg, those areas that are major summer rainfall production areas. The 116-year average, 1st of July, 31st of December, 242 millimeters. What they have received is 398, almost 400 millimeters. So that is 164%.
Sure.
Just take December for that area. The average is 80 millimeters. What they have received is 223. In other words, almost 280%.
Okay, Francois, can I ask you this question? You're giving me a lot of stats, and we do know that they're important. I also understand that some producers in the Western summer grain production region have recorded the highest rainfall in more than 100 years. And that does speak for itself, does it not? But we also understand that South African producers are exceedingly good risk managers. And in this case, the effects of the damage has unfortunately reached far beyond the parameters of normal risk management practices. What is that telling us?
Yeah. So this is, in a disaster situation, you must always give the context, and because good rains, like we had, is also good for crops. So there's some areas, actually, we will still, our average sort of maize crop in South Africa is somewhere between 10 and 15 million tons. So we might still be able to receive 12, say at this stage, 12 million tons. It's of course early days to make predictions. But your problem is in the western areas. And remember, in the western areas, white maize is produced. White maize is for human consumption. Yellow maize is for animal consumption.
Okay.
Yellow maize is an international commodity. In other words, produced around the globe, and you can import it. So that's not your problem. Your problem is human consumption. White maize, which is really produced in a few countries around the world, South Africa being one of the major producers, Mexico the other major producer. So your possibility to import when there's a shortage is very limited. And then you see increased prices. Now, with this high rainfall and excessive rainfall in the western areas, I think at this moment that is our problem. White maize consumption is going to suffer, and that is going to impact on price.
Obviously, and that's going to... That is going to create a horrible chain reaction, is it not? The moment one commodity goes up in price, we know that it's going to be felt really all the way down the line. Uh, just to also further put this into context, the discussion that you and I are having is that we understand the sandy water table soils in the
Yes.
areas that we've been talking about are saturated, and the water thus remains on the land, causing severe damage to planted maize crops. And also, because of these extreme conditions, wheat producers has found it impossible to access their fields for harvesting. So wheat left standing has obviously deteriorated to fodder grain, which means a huge loss to the farmer and to the industry as a whole.
Yes, you did your research very well. You're absolutely right. The sandy soils in the Free State, um, those are waterlogged, typically waterlogged. Once those profiles are filled up, water has nowhere to go. But again, the wheat, the latter part of the wheat harvest was implicated. And of course, it is a loss to that specific farmer. But on a national scale, that's not my worry. The wheat crop is not the real problem. And as I said, we're a net importer and there's good production worldwide of wheat, so we can import it. The real problem is, and remember in South Africa, because our basic staple for the poorest of the poor is white maize.
Of
That
course, of
is by
course.
far the cheapest source of energy. And
Absolutely.
once those prices are affected, then that's the scale. Because we have a big joblessness problem in South Africa, and
Sure.
those individuals are bound to consume a white maize, and the price effect on them is huge on the poorest of the poor.
So it's a vicious cycle here all around.
Of course, what it also then impacts on, once your soya prices and your maize prices increase because of the situation, then your protein production, in other words, poultry, dairy, those are also affected because 60-70% of their cost is protein and energy. And that price, hits those industries very hard. And therefore, you'll also see a huge increase in sunflower oil. The commodity price of sunflower has doubled during the season. And the other price increases are between 30 and 50%. And of course, as
So
the
a
situation
vicious, it's
that there's
really a
still 3
vicious
months.
cycle.
Yeah, there's still 3 months of rainfall in the summer rainfall area that has to come. And if this cycle, continues, then of course the problem gets bigger and bigger.
So it's a terrible ripple effect, a very negative ripple effect. Now, I also know that in Wesselsbron, Bultfontein, Hoopstad, and Bothaville districts, the indications are that up to 60% of the maize crop was lost.
Yes.
And also that it's too late for the farmers to replant. Is that in fact true? And having said that, what does it mean when you're going to be asking government to declare this situation a state of disaster? What
Yes.
exactly are we asking government to do, and how's that going to help or just support farmers and their workers? What sort of reprieve can you expect by declaring a state of disaster? If you could respond to those questions, please.
Yes, actually, you're absolutely correct. Those areas that you named are the severely impacted, and between 60 and 70% of damage there. So what do you try to do in situations like this? You start at district level, and then you work up to provincial level. So of course, the whole Free State will not be declared as a disaster area because it simply just is not the fact. But there's certain areas, those that you named. So that is where you start. You start with local government. You activate and you lobby those mayors so that they go up in the structure, go to the provincial level, and give them the facts that we have spoken about. If they then declare those districts as disaster areas, that means that emergency funds by provincial can be released, and in the following ways. First of all, I think the Credit Act, you're not allowed as a financier to recklessly provide credit. So in this case, if there's a disaster, then you can then again extend credit to those farmers without being seen as reckless because they had an disaster situation. That's the first thing. The second thing is there might be some tax reliefs. There might be in certain situations, they might decide to go to farmers and help them with their production cost. Now, the problem, Julie, with all these, and this is not, of course, we've been through a drought cycle in 2015, 2016. You spoke about the locusts, and there's been very heavy incidents of hail. The problem is that both local, provincial, and national government does not have the funds. That is the frustrating part of it.
Sure.
Is that you go through this whole process, legal process, to get the disaster area declared, but then we very rarely see funds flowing as a result of that.
So going forward, Francois, how do we assist these farmers, and how do we, obviously, apart from the very negative ripple effects regarding high food prices, sunflower oil, and a few other commodities that you mentioned, soya seeds, and the byproducts from soya, we're going to have it really tough this coming winter from the way I see it. So if there are no funds as far as government is concerned, how are these people, how are these farmers going to be able to survive? What's the option for them? What sort of support is there in place to just see them surviving and hopefully go ahead in the next planting season?
To be absolutely frank, I think funds coming from government, both local, provincial, and national, is highly unlikely. So these farmers will be, they will look at their own balance sheets in the first place, of course. The second place is on the input providers, on input providers like the commodity providers, like the Agbiz members, agricultural businesses. They would definitely support their farmers. The local communities will help, as we've seen in COVID. A lot of these agri-businesses have supported and reached out. NGOs, of course, Gift of the Givers and so forth. They are major contributors. If they didn't exist and provide support, churches, community organizations, those are typically our support structure in the rural areas.
Francois, my final question to you then would be, are these farmers not insured against drought and floods and heavy rains, etc., or is that too risky as far as the brokers are concerned? Is that a very risky business?
It's a cost issue. So typically farmers would insure against hail damage. So that's a very limited liability. But if they insure against drought or flooding, it's very costly, and it just does not make sense to them, because this is an incident that takes place, say, once in 20 years or 30 years.
Right.
And it simply just does not make financial sense to them. So, yes, hail damage, yes, but flooding, that would typically not happen.
Okay, then on that very negative and sad news story, we're going to wrap up. We pray for, the farmers' survival, all of their workers, the laborers, because like I've mentioned a couple of times whilst you've been talking, that it creates such a negative backlash and a vicious cycle. It impacts so many tiers of society. It's just not the farmer, it's a whole host of people directly and indirectly affected by this. And all I can say is that we put our hands together and pray that, the Almighty just hears our prayers, and all the NGOs and support structures come into place to support the people that are most in need. Francois Strydom, Agbiz Chairperson, thank you indeed for being on the show with us this morning and explaining just how all of this plays out on farmlands. Go well, and thank you
for your
indeed
coverage.
once again.
Thank you for your coverage and your concerns as well.
Thank you. I do appreciate it.
Thank you, ma'am.
It is exactly 8:31. News and views on Salam Media. Still to come on the show, we'll be talking with Davy Ruet, Becky Sisa's editor-in-chief and executive director, about the weak rand and the firm dollar. What does it mean for us here in South Africa? Stay with us.
Freedom Stationery supply Marlin and Marlin Kids pens to me and my school.